Hey there nation, and welcome to the show. We help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and welcome to Cheap Shots, the ultimate series for wargamers who want stunning tabletop quality miniatures without breaking the bank. In this series, we'll show you how to save money on your miniatures painting hobby by using affordable craft paints, budget-friendly tools, and clever techniques. So whether if you're a beginner or a seasoned hobbyist, you'll learn how to achieve incredible results without the premium price tag. And on today's video, we're going to show you guys how to quickly, and more importantly, cheaply, paint up Thorns of the Briar Queen for your games of Warhammer Underworlds. The Thorns of the Briar Queen are an undead night haunt warband for your games of Age of Sigmar Warhammer Underworlds, and these guys are going to be bringing you to a beautiful ethereal paint job to a wonderful tabletop standard. And by following the recommended materials as well as tips and techniques that we suggest in this video, we can help you save over $119.46 with the only investment total of $29.44. And that's assuming, of course, that you're purchasing everything for the very first time. So as you can see in this background image, this is the end result will look like. So with that being said, let's show you guys how to quickly and cheaply paint up the Thorns of the Briar Queen. So the first thing we have to do is to assemble our miniatures, and since these are Warhammer Underworld warbands, they actually have just kind of like this wonderful push fit together assembly, which makes them very, very quick and very easy to assemble as well. And once we are done, the next thing we got to do, of course, is to prime the miniatures. Now, priming does a couple of things. The first thing that it does, it creates a surface for your acrylic paints to adhere to. Unfortunately, if you were to take your paint and apply it directly onto bare plastic, it would just rub off with the slightest bit of friction, which of course would ruin the overall finish of your miniature. So priming prevents that from happening. The second thing that priming also does too is it also has a large impact on the vibrancy of the colors that you use in your paint scheme. Traditionally speaking, the more bright or vibrant the colors you want to use, you want to go with a lighter primer. Now in this situation, we're going to use Rust-Oleum flat white primer because we're going to be doing an ethereal paint job, as you saw in the previous slide, by making these guys glow. And we're going to achieve that effect by using a very specific technique called glazing, where we're going to apply layers of watered down paint on a white base coat, so that way the white kind of bleeds through the coats of glazing that you put on the miniatures to make it have like this ethereal kind of glowing look on it. So I like to use Rust-Oleum flat white primer. Get it at your local Walmart. It's a nice cheap product. Just give it a once over and ready to move on to our glazing. Now, a lot of people like to use Games Workshop technical paints to do that, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's a beautiful series of products to use. However, though, it is quite expensive at $7.80 a pot, whereas a 58-cent tube of Apple Barrel's Crisp Apple Green will achieve the exact same result. All you got to do, of course, is apply 3 layers of glaze of this paint directly onto the miniature. Now, to do glazing, it's pretty simple. All you got to do is make a 50-50 mixture of Apple Barrel Crisp Apple Green as well as some water and make it into like a wash, and you apply it like a wash directly over the entirety of the miniature. Now the reason why you're doing this is because by diluting the pigment of the paint, the white undercoating that we prime the miniature in starts to bleed through a little bit on the layer of paint, and it creates this kind of off green kind of color, but at the same time it looks like it's kind of glowing. And you achieve this result by adding successive layers of glazing directly onto the miniature, where it kind of creates this kind of uneven kind of glowing look with these guys. And after doing 3 thin coats of glazing, it looks like these guys have a beautiful bright green color. And technically speaking, if you really wanted to, you could just stop right here at this process and you could pretty much achieve the result you're looking for, technically speaking. But we want to make these guys look a little bit better than that, and so we're going to add some additional colors to these miniatures as well. Now when it comes to glazing, the important thing I want you to remember is that patience is the key word here, because when you apply your first layer of glaze, you have to wait for it to completely dry before adding the next layer of glaze. So it does take a little bit, maybe anywhere between 20 minutes to 30 minutes between coats, depending on drying times in your local area. So just, be a little bit patient with yourself, be kind to yourself, and then work on other projects while you're letting it dry between different coats. So to create some more visual interest to these miniatures, we decided to apply another layer of glaze. This time we're using Tuscan Teal by Apple Barrel Paint. We're making a 50-50 mixture of Tuscan Teal as well as water. We're applying this like a glaze, like we did before, right directly on top of the crisp apple green that we did. Except this time we're doing the upper layers of their cloaks, like their hoods, their mantles, their veils, that sort of thing. Now what this does, of course, it creates this kind of interesting visual interest going on in our miniature, because now we have that glowing green from the crisp apple that we did earlier, but at the same time though we have kind of like this darker teal, but at the same time it looks like it's glowing as well. Kind of adds some color variety to your miniatures and doesn't make it look like all one bland thing. Now don't get me wrong, you could of course just do the green crisp apple green by itself if you wanted to, but the Tuscan Teal adds just a little bit more dimensionality to the miniatures. It makes it look like these guys are coming out of the shadows and they're glowing at the exact same time. And once again, you'll need to apply 3 coats of this glaze onto the veils as well as the mantles and cloaks, and once that's just done drying, the next thing I gotta do real quick is a dry brush. So next we're going to dry brush these miniatures. Now dry brushing is an important step because what it does, it creates the illusion of depth in your miniatures by creating highlighting. When you dry brush your miniature, what ends up happening is the pigmented paint actually adheres to the raised surface of the miniature while the darker colors remain in the recesses. So in this situation, as you can see, we did a dry brushing, you can see there are highlighted areas of the bone and the skeletal structures of all of the different fighters in this warband, the individual folds of cloth, etc. Now, when it comes to dry brushing, what you want to do is you want to do a very, very light dry brushing at first, and you can brighten this up to whatever level of brightness that you desire. But I want you to start off with a very subtle dry brush because it's very easy to add dry brushing to a miniature, but it's very difficult to take it off, especially if you're doing an ethereal paint job like this. In this situation, I like to use Pale Gray by Folk Art. You can get this off-white color at your local Walmart. I just did a quick dry brush all over the entire of the miniatures just to add some highlights to these guys and make it look like that little extra pop with that glowing effect. And you want to do a very light dry brush that we don't have an overly pastel kind of look going on with these miniatures either. And it may sound weird to kind of say this, but we're actually pretty much done with a lot of these miniatures. A lot of the details we're working on earlier are almost done. We just got to start working on the key details. Now, specifically, the main detail we're going to work on is on the bases. Now, the the Underworld's miniature line for Warhammer Age of Sigmar, it's kind of like a mixed blessing and a curse, the bases that they have for the miniatures. The reason why is because these miniature lines have some really intricate and highly detailed bases on the miniatures. So things like plants, animals, pieces of masonry, twisted pieces of iron railing, all kinds of different cool things on it. So it is kind of cool that way. However, it is kind of a pain to paint. So we're going to be spending a lot more time, oddly enough as it may sound, on the bases that we're actually going to be doing on the miniatures themselves. Now, I want to make it look like these guys are coming out of a graveyard. So to achieve that result, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 2 thin layers of pigment paint, and I'm going to water it down just slightly, just so that way it gets into all the nooks and crannies of the bases as well. I'm going to do more like a glaze than I normally would on these miniatures. So I'm just going to do a 50-50 mixture of water as well as pigment, and I'm only going to apply 2 thin coats this time around. And the reason why is because the pigment paint is very concentrated, so it's going to be nice and dark, but at the same time I want that little bit of white undercoat to bleed through, so that way when we dry brush it, it brings out a lot of those details. So once again, we're going to dry brush these bases real quick with some Pale Gray by Folk Art. As you can see, you bring up a lot of the details we couldn't see before, so like the roots of trees, individual rocks, piece of masonry, plants, all kinds of really great details. And we're going to spend some time picking out those details on the bases to make these look more lifelike on the battlefield. So the first thing we're going to work on real quick is on the wood elements of these miniatures, specifically on the briars on the bases, as well as the piece of wood that are on the miniatures themselves. Now, this is called the Thorns of the Briar Queen, and there's a lot of briars spread throughout the bases on these miniatures. We're going to pick out those details real quick with 2 thin layers of burnt umber by Apple Barrel paint. We're just going to apply this like a base coat. So for example, like the whip looking weapon, which is basically vines coming out of the Briar Queen, we're going to pick out those details on that. We're also going to pick out any lumber that's on these miniatures as well, like the handle of the axes, the pieces of wood being used as shield, handles of weapons, all sorts of things. Now, the reason why we're painting these weapons and base coating like normal paint jobs is because I want to make it look like what's happening is that the ghosts are actually physically interacting with physical objects around them, and they're using those physical objects to strike at their enemies and also cause all kinds of problems. Something that you would see normally in a typical horror movie, and I want to achieve that exact same result. And once we're done base coating those details, we're going to dry brush with some Territorial Beige. You can get this at your local Walmart as well. It's a beautiful beige color, a dark beige color. We're going to dry brush all the wood elements that we did earlier, both on the bases as well as the wood elements around the miniatures themselves. As you can see, there's a beautiful job bringing out that wood grain kind of look on these miniatures. And once we're done with our dry brushing, we're ready to move on to our next step. And the next step is to pick out the bone elements on these miniatures as well, because we want to make these things look a little bit more visually appealing than just the normal ethereal. A lot of novice painters, they make the mistake of just sticking with the ethereal look only, so that their miniatures look kind of boring and not all that interesting looking. I mean, you do have to achieve a really cool ethereal look, but they're not as appealing as if you add some more colors to it. And so specifically what we do for these guys, we're going to put the belt elements, so like things like the skulls on the bases, on the hands of the decapitated ghost there on the left hand side, the skull of the Briar Queen. We're also going to pick up the noose around the hangman's neck as well. We're going to pick out all those skeletal bone structures by 2 thin layers of khaki paint by Apple Barrel paint. You can get at your local Walmart for cheap, and we're just going to put 2 thin layers of this stuff all over those bone elements and ready to move on to our next detail. And that next detail, of course, are on the blossoms. In fact, if you look at these miniatures, there's quite a bit of flowers spread throughout the entirety of these miniatures, kind of adding this kind of regal, almost kind of solemn, gothic, kind of snow, like Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, Disney princess kind of flower thing. I don't know how to explain it. It's just very uniquely gothic looking. So in order to bring out those details, I'm actually going to use a very contrasting color. It's going to contrast a lot of details we did earlier, and that's going to be using Bright Magenta by Apple Barrel paint. So all the blossoms, for example, like on the briars of the Briar Briar Queen, as well as the flowers on the base of the miniatures. We're going to put 2 thin layers of this bright magenta paint in, which contrasts nicely with all of the beautiful ethereal paint that we did earlier, and ready to move on to our next dry brush. In order to add some additional depth to these blossoms that we painted magenta, we're going to do a quick dry brushing real quick. So my Cameo Pink by Apple Barrel paint. It's a beautiful powder pink color that you can get at your local Walmart. We're just going to do a quick dry brushing on the blossoms that we did earlier in magenta. The last few elements we're going to work on these miniatures are on the metallic elements for the most part. And the reason why is because, like I said before, I want to make it look like that these ghosts are physically interacting with physical objects and inhabiting them and possessing them to attack their unwary victims. So for all the metallic elements, things like helmets, chains, blades of weapons, nails that are nailed into their bodies, all kinds of inner kind of metallic elements, we're going to pick that on 2 thin layers of Gunmetal Gray by Folk Art. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 75 cents. We're going to just put 2 thin layers on this. It's going to look really nice, dark, and kind of grimy, and when we do our oil wash on it, it's going to make it look really awesome as well. Now for all the gold elements, things like jewelry, the tiara of the Briar Queen, hilts of weapons and handles of weapons, we're going to pick that on 2 thin layers of Deco Arts Emperor's Gold. You get it at your local Walmart for about 99 cents, a beautiful rich color, rich golden color that is very similar to Retributor armor, but a heck of a lot cheaper, and achieves the exact same result. And we're just going to put 2 thin layers of that as well. And the last thing we're going to do, and I do apologize for this, there's a character in the background who's holding a candle, and he's got a little bit of flame on that candle. You really can't see it because unfortunately I put the tube of paint right behind the flame, but we're going to tick up that flame with 2 thin layers of King's Gold by Apple Barrel paint as well to kind of create that detail. And as you can see, these look a lot more visually interesting than we just stuck with the original ethereal paint job at the beginning of this project. So our very last step for our miniatures is to once again do an oil wash on this one. Now we're going to be very specific when we do our oil wash this time. We're actually not going to put oil wash all over the entire of the miniature. Usually when I do projects like this, I like to paint the entire of the miniature with oil wash, but we're not going to do that this time around. Specifically, we're going to paint things like the bone elements, the metallic elements on these miniatures, as well as the bases, as well as the flowers on these miniatures as well, and nothing else. We're going to leave the ethereal paint job alone so that way that ethereal has a nice, vibrant, glowing color, while the rest of the metal and the bases and everything else looks nice and grimy and dirty, like it's been, you know, weathered and worn for time of eons of time, unmeasurable. Now usually when you do an oil wash, a lot of people like to use Iron Painter Strong Tone, which is perfectly fine because Iron Painter Strong Tone is a wonderful product that does as advertised. The only problem though, it is kind of expensive, so in order to get around that, we're going to use mid-wax poly shades and specifically in Mission Oak color in order to achieve that same similar result, but using this instead from Walmart because it only costs like $6.99 a can at Walmart, so it's significantly cheaper. And as you can see, the oil wash does a couple of things. The first thing that it does, of course, is it smooths out any transitions between dry brushes and base coat that we did earlier, removing any kind of pastel look. The second thing the oil wash does too is it also seeps into the recesses of the miniatures, bring out those details we couldn't see before, like the gaps in the teeth of the Briar Queen, for example. And at the same time, the third thing it does, it darkens down the value of the colors. So now the weapons and stuff that we have on these characters look nice and decayed and darkened. It seeps directly into the crevices of the recesses of the bases, bringing a lot of those details out, so it does an amazing job. Now when it comes to oil washing, you have to let this stuff dry and cure for about 24 hours because there is polyurethane in the stain, and the nice part about it is it will protect your paint job with a nice hard outer coating. So my suggestion to you is to actually do this as the very last step of your painting process. Paint up your miniatures with the mid-wax poly shades, wait until the next day to pick up your progress again, and then you can move on. So as you can see in this photo, we waited 24 hours for the mid-wax poly shade to dry and cure, and the next thing we gotta do now is start working on the bases. The last thing we're gonna do, of course, is to rim the bases, and we're gonna rim them in 2 thin layers of English Ivy Green by Apple Barrel paint. It's a nice dark olive drab green, and I use this color for all of the undead miniatures in the studio's collection because I like to keep my bases thematically similar. And plus, it just kind of obviously just contrasts nicely with the ethereal paint job as well as the base work that we did. The very last step, and this of course is completely optional, is to put a matte varnish spray over the miniatures. That way we can protect the paint job on our miniatures. The reason why I like to use this is because mid-wax poly acrylic, when it dries, it does have a high gloss finish, and I like a more of a matte varnish and matte finish on my miniatures. So I just get some Krylon matte varnish spray that you get at your local Walmart. Just do it once real quick all over the entire of the miniature, and we're completely done. Obviously, if you do like that high gloss finish, you could obviously skip this step. And here we are. Here is the end result of the Thorns of the Briar Queen. As you can see, we brought these guys to a beautiful tabletop standard with that ethereal glow going on with these miniatures, and we also saved a ton of money at the exact same time. So with that being said, let's talk about exactly the materials that you need to purchase for both Army Painter as well as Citadel if you want to achieve the exact same results we did, but using the name brand paints instead. So if you want to use Citadel as well as Army Painter to achieve the exact same results we did, these are the materials that you need to buy. You need to buy a can of Corax White Spray for $24, as well as the colors Thunderhawk Blue, Averland Sunset, Vulcan Green, Fulgrim Pink, Screamer Pink, Morghast Bone, Baylor Brown, Helion Green, Eshin Gray, as well as Ulthuan Gray, and all those colors cost $4.55 a piece. You also need to buy Leadbelcher, Retributor, Retributor Armor, as well as Wildwood. Those colors cost you $7.80 for those. You also need to buy Army Painter Strong Tone for $32, as well as some Unitorium Varnish Spray for $24. Now, assuming that you're purchasing everything for the very first time, you're talking about a grand total investment of $148.90 in order to paint your miniatures the same way we did, but using those name brand paints instead. And when you subtract it to our cheapskate method total of only $29.44, we end up saving you $119.46. So there you guys have it. If you guys are looking for a quick way to save a bunch of money on your miniatures wargaming hobby, may I suggest using cheaper craft paints. After all, you achieve similar results as a tabletop, but you pay less of a fraction of the price in order to paint up your miniatures to the exact same standard. And of course, if you guys have any suggestions, some other money saving tips, please put them down in the comments back below. I'd love to hear some of your guys' money saving tips that you guys use in order to do the miniature wargaming hobby. So that's good for you guys. As always, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. I'm Commander Cheapskate. That's good for this video. I will catch you guys next one. Peace out and stay classy.